Welcome to our Global Politics podcast about Latvian politics. So, Edo, would you like to start us off with how Trump's tariffs will affect Latvian economics?
Okay, so Latvia is an export-dependent economy. They have quite significant exports, and while most of those are within Europe, particularly to Lithuania, who comprises almost 20% of their exports, still there is part of the Latvian economy, 3% of exports that can be very severely hit by Trump's tariffs. If the tariffs are high enough, and this might spark a trade war that ends a U.S.-European trade as a whole, this could result in a loss of up to 1.5% of Latvia's GDP, resulting in a massive economic hit to the nation. Furthermore, Trump's policies in Ukraine could once again bring peace to the region quite quickly, although not in a way that I approve of, which would significantly lower wheat prices. One of Latvia's largest exports, comprising 5.8% of their $20 billion exports, is wheat. So the re-entry of Ukrainian wheat into the European market could lower the wheat prices and decrease Latvia's exports as well as the revenue they make from those exports. So Trump's policies as a whole would quite negatively impact Latvia. However, there are certain exports, particularly gas and some crude petrol that Latvia has access to, that could be benefited by Trump's tariffs, as they could spark a trade war between Europe and the USA, resulting in a decrease in U.S. petrol in imports from the U.S. to Europe of gas and petrol, raising prices and helping the Latvian economy somewhat, but also raising prices domestically, which could be seen as negative because it will cause inflation. Gustav, what do you think about this?
Well, I think you overplay the importance of the Ukrainian, breadbasket of Europe in Latvia's exports of wheat, because Ukraine already has a deal with Russia to export grain through the Black Sea. Both of them export grain through the Black Sea. Ukraine is exporting grain at the moment, so even if the war ends, it's not such a significant change as you made it seem. Well, I don't think it will be.
Really, I think it's mainly the shipping routes that have been affected. Most of Ukraine's shipping came out through a set of bulk carriers in the Black Sea, and those have been negatively impacted by the naval war that has occurred in the Black Sea between the Russians and the Ukrainians, although its importance has decreased as the Russian Navy had to retreat into its ports. But still, the annexation of Crimea decreased the capacity of Ukraine to export its goods somewhat, and furthermore, the annexation of other Ukrainian ports in the Sea of Azov will negatively impact this as well, although Ukrainian goods could still be exported through Odessa. How about we move on to the geopolitical implications as a whole instead of focusing particularly on economics? What do you think the implications of Trump pulling out U.S. soldiers from Eastern Europe will be on Latvia, Gustavs?
Well, I believe the impact will not be as impactful as it initially might seem, as the U.S. is one of the most powerful states. However, in the Baltic states, there are around only 2,000 U.S. soldiers, which is only a small part from other NATO soldiers from other countries, like, for example, Spain or Canada, as well as other states in Europe. And for example, a reason for this could be Trump's pardoning of 2021's January 6th Capitol rioters, as he pardoned all the 1,500 offenders on his first day in office.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think the implications will be that Europe is raising defense spending? Latvia already is spending 4 to 5% of its GDP on defense. Do you think they will increase that spending even more?
Latvia right now is around 3.6%, if I remember correctly, of their GDP spent on military defense, and they have goals of raising it to 5% by 2030, if I'm correct. And I would say this is a good move, as Ukraine needs everybody's help right now, and the U.S. As the situation is still developing, we don't know how the U.S. is going to act, and therefore Europe's therefore Europe is the highest the biggest ally to Ukraine right now.
Yeah. Do you think that defense spending is really necessary, even with France offering to provide a nuclear shield for Europe? Do you think there is still a chance of Russia and the EU breaking into an all-out war, which would be particularly impactful on Latvia due to its close proximity to Russia?
I believe that yes, it is important that all states, regardless of their GDP, for example, like even though France spends less than the Baltic states on military defense from their GDP, their impact is larger as the monetary value is higher.
Yeah.
However, I believe that it's also the Baltics help that they can provide as they were part of the Soviet Union in the past, as well as Ukraine was, as we all know, and that. Even though France can help more monetary, the Baltic states have the possibility of giving insightful information regarding the Russians' tactics in a way.
Mhm.
That could be argued.
Will either of you be participating in the Latvian conscription efforts that have been recently increased, even with Foreign Secretary Baiba Braze, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, joining the National Guard in Latvia? What do you two, as Latvian citizens, think about these increased conscription efforts?
I think this is part of an increase in conscription all over Europe, as
Yeah.
proposed by the Latvian Prime Minister. President, I forget what it is. But anyway, do you think it's time to cut NATO? Is Europe, the way Europe is going, they're becoming more, dependent on themselves. America has become, they've shot themselves in the foot here. Is it time for NATO to sort of split apart and create a European treaty organization? Or perhaps include countries like Japan, Australia that weren't included in NATO before to create a more unified sort of defense force? And then Latvia could invest more in its domestic military companies rather than buying from other companies to boost its economy after these US tariffs.
I think really the US has shown to be an extremely unreliable ally, and Europe has to sort of rely on itself now. Canada can still be relied upon, so I think NATO as a whole shouldn't break down. But I think at the minimum, the US should start to be excluded out of this general Western alliance because they don't seem to have values that align with the rest of us anymore.
Or at least not relied on. Rely on the US.
We can't really rely on them. Furthermore, I believe it is important for the EU to begin a process of federalization. Otherwise, we are basically dead. The three major powers in today's world that moves more towards a multipolar society, Russia, China, India, and Russia, and actually four now that I think about it, all have extremely large populations. Europe is comprised of much smaller countries, and the EU as a whole is quite ineffective due to the need for unanimity, which allows countries as small as Malta to overpower decisions that the rest of the EU overwhelmingly supports. So I think it is important for the EU to start centralizing its institutions, making the parliament and making central governments of each nation less powerful, concentrating power in Brussels, but also decreasing bureaucracy, which has been one of the largest criticisms of the EU as a whole.
As for the conscription thing you asked before, I believe that it's a good thing, as Estonia has had it implemented ever since they regained independence in 1991, and Lithuania also had abolished it. However, they re-implemented it after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, and Latvia first implemented it 2 years ago in 2023. And I would say most citizens should have an incentive to go, as if you go voluntarily, that means you're not randomly picked from the lottery. The state will pay for your university studies in Latvia.
How significant do you think it is that Latvia has recently decoupled from the Russian energy grid with the rest of the Baltic countries and has become more energetically reliant on Europe, which is furthermore reliant on imported US gas and oil?
I believe that's a good move, as we don't want, as if we import if we're connected to a Russian power grid, that means we're in a way supporting the Russian economy, which is obviously not what we want to do.
Yeah.
And I would say the connecting to Europe's power grid is really important. Is a big significant move, as Ukraine was planned to do that. Initially, it was planned that Ukraine will do that in 2023, However, following the invasion of 2022, they completed it almost a year earlier, as they don't want to be dependent on the aggressor state here.
Yeah, continuing with the theme of energy, do either of you think that Europe should turn back to nuclear energy?
Definitely.
Honestly, our increased reliance on gas and oil, of which we have almost none, has been damaging Europe for quite a long time, and now Latvia, having joined the European grid, is going to have the same problems as the rest of Europe, that we are shutting down nuclear reactors and replacing them with gas and oil, which we can't produce, and which are much more inefficient, more expensive in the short term particularly. So do you think it's good for Europe to start pivoting back to nuclear energy, which Latvia could contribute to significantly, because these post-Soviet nations have quite a lot of experience in nuclear science, as well as the rest of Eastern Europe as a whole. Like, Darmstadt was probably the most important nuclear laboratory in the world at some point.
I mean, France is, very cutting edge of nuclear energy at the moment. So I'm not sure the Eastern European, expertise would be that important, especially with their older reactor designs that are, not as safe. Well, have a history of. But we must look at, modern reactors. No modern reactor has melted down. They're an incredibly safe thing.
Fukushima melted down because it had a tsunami.
Come on, exactly.
We don't tend to have those in Europe.
But
I'd say a problem why people might be concerned for that is that they believe that the nuclear reactors are not safe. Even though all the meltdowns that have happened in history, at least most of them have been to human error and not because it's unsafe.
What Europe needs to do is re-engage in a campaign of energy self-reliance focused on showing people how safe nuclear reactors are, which would also help reduce polarization in Europe, because those far left and far right parties, they also often run on a campaign of basically denuclearizing Europe. In France, it's been quite a big problem. In Germany as well. The left in Germany has shut down many nuclear reactors, putting Germany really back on coal. Which is
a ridiculous idea.
It's ridiculous because Germany is also running out of coal.
Exactly, and then they claim to be environmentally friendly.
Exactly. No, they are called the Green Party.
The Green Party.
Yeah.
What a ridiculous name.
Yeah. And what do you think the implications on Latvia are of other political cases, such as the recent EU parliament member that has been arrested for collaborating with the FSB, the Russian intelligence service?
Well, I would say it's a problem. I would say it's a more Latvian problem that a large part of the population, namely 1/3, around like 600,000 people of Latvia's population, are ethnic Russians. Therefore, their values are more non-European and more towards to the Russians, which is also mainly the reason why there are quote unquote so many Russian parties in Latvia. I don't know the exact number, but I would say it's like at least 3 and one has quite large significance. One of them, Ainaš Šlesers from the party Latvija Pirmā Vietā, which is essentially one of his recent events. He was in a way supporting Trump, which is also obviously not what Latvia wants right now. They don't want the support from, they want the support from America, but not the way Trump has implied it.
Yeah, there's this conditional support where you have to sign over your economy, you have to sign over your natural resources, and you have to end up being a U.S. protectorate rather than a ally.
It's interesting you complain about that when you said earlier that we should sort of centralize European government and hand over our resources to Brussels.
I mean, Brussels is a institution that is trying to prioritize European interests.
The
US is prioritizing their own interests very clearly. The US has dedicated itself to useless wars, and it has dragged Europe into them with no real reason, and it has extremely negatively impacted Europe. For example, the war in Iraq resulted in terrorist attacks all across Europe to this day. The other day there was a car ramming in a city in Germany. The largest terrorist attacks in Europe, Lockerbie and the Madrid train bombings, have also been caused by American intervention in Libya and Iraq. So really, it is time for Europe to pivot away from the US and focus on its own interests. And I think that will require some sacrifices, particularly from smaller countries such as Latvia, which are going to lose some say in European issues. But I still feel that Latvian interests would be much better represented in Brussels than in Washington.
Definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Do you feel we should sort of isolate Europe more and cut down on immigration?
I feel like that's a problem. The demographic crisis in Europe is a problem which will develop in the next few years, but I think AI particularly is going to help somewhat with that, and we are going to be able to somewhat reduce immigration, because immigration has been used as a way to sort of plug the hole of the demographic crisis, which is a problem in some countries such as Latvia, because Latvia, there are no other countries in the world that speak Latvian. Other countries such as Spain and France can import migrants which more easily integrate into their societies, while countries such as Latvia and Germany struggle much more. So I think the improvements in productivity that AI and other improvements in technology will bring will help reduce the impact of Europe's demographic crisis.
Could you explain how AI will help?
We'll
with
take
the-
over jobs, I think is what he's implying.
AI improves the productivity of workers. If I can do the work of 3 people instead of 1, then you don't need to.
Yeah, you need a third of the people.
Yeah,
Okay,
you don't
yeah.
need 2 migrants to come in and fill the jobs, which I think will help preserve Europe as
Like their sovereignty?
No, I wouldn't say Europe's
identity.
sovereignty. I would
Maybe
say it helps
identity.
preserve the European identity in some ways.
Mm.
But this migrant culture has also, this culture of immigration in these last few years has also made Europe a much more multicultural and
Yeah.
interesting place, which I think also
Well, it has-
brings some very interesting values and many benefits to Europeans.
It has seen a rise of sort of right-wing populism, though.
Yeah.
Where right-wing leaders are really preying on migration as one of their campaign promises.
Yeah, but that's why I think their European center, left wing and right wing, needs to stop fighting each other like they've done in Germany. Sort of form this block against these right wing populists. That and in accordance with that is one of the reasons which why the unanimity vote should be sort of rebuked, because these right-wing populist leaders like Meloni and Orban can block all European regulations that want to benefit Europe, and Orban is a famous pro-Russian advocate, and that could significantly harm countries at risk, such as Latvia particularly, at risk of Russian invasion. If we have collaborators inside our structure that can block all attempts to make Europe a sort of stronger against those threats. All right, so I think that is time. This has been a great first episode, I believe.
Yeah.
Discussed some very general issues.
I hope to dig down into specifics in our
Yep.
next edition.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right.